Hi, Music 189ers. Dr. Hoover here. I just read through your discussion to the first three questions of Kiri Miller's Virtuosity and Guitar Hero and Rock Band article and the responses. I was so impressed by the discussion that unfolded. As you probably know, one of the challenges of an online course is getting students to interact. And I heavily contemplated integrating synchronous projects in the course, but with the 6-week term, it gets to be a bit of a time crunch. So I was really impressed that even though you were discussing and contemplating these questions asynchronously, that it seemed like you were really talking to one another. So I figured I should really talk to you so you know that I read through all of your answers to the three questions, the first group, and then for group two, your responses to your peers' answers to those questions. As I was reading, instead of responding individually to everyone, I kind of just made a summary here that you can see on this screen of the three questions and very interesting points I thought that were made by students. So just really quickly want to go over those so that people who may have responded or answered earlier in the week didn't get to hear later answers later on in the week, by the weekend, that you get a total view of the discussion that was had. All right, so the technology question was really great in kind of probing you to reconsider not just definitions of virtuosos and musicians, but also composers and the audience as well, and how the definition of music changes. You'll get this more in our final module, Module 6, that you're exploring hopefully right now. There were some of you who stated that, technology for all of its strengths has some weaknesses because it can create unhealthy desires to be like rock musicians without ever training or going through the actual experience. I wish Mozart had been a DJ as well. Thank you, Andrew, for that comment. I think that was a really great way of highlighting how much virtuosity should change based on technology, right? Mozart as a virtuoso pianist may very well still be a virtuoso pianist today, but what if he had also been a DJ? What if that was his musical calling in the 21st century? So I feel like we should start the hashtag #OneAMozartDJ 2016. Thumbs up. All right. I just like this idea of changing definitions of music. All right, so let's move to the bulk of the discussion, which focused, I was asking you to really think about, are these Guitar Hero and Rock Band performers or gamers really musicians? Are they also virtuosos? So I think that the majority of you, like 75% of you, are really leaning towards the nay. Or if it were 50-50, there are some of you who could see it from the other perspective, but personally just feel that these gamers are indeed that. There's this difference between a community of musicians and a community of gamers. So you could be an expert virtuoso actually in gaming, but that's a different thing than being a virtuoso in music. So yes to being a virtuoso, but not to being a musician. You also pointed out, hey, this isn't playing an acoustic instrument, and it's also not teaching actual guitar playing. Just some questions I want to throw out, and perhaps you'll be pondering these in Module 6, is I'll be curious, do you think electronic musicians can ever aspire then to levels of virtuosity because electronic technology is in part assisting them to create and think about music? So I want to always get you questioning. We're at that stage in the course where it's not just memorizing content or listening analysis, but getting you to critically think about what you're listening to every day in relation to a Western art tradition or idiom. This idea of not teaching actual guitar playing, just my personal reaction to that, but can pretending to play guitar lead to a desire to play an actual guitar? Is there anything wrong with pretending if that actually leads to playing a guitar? Is this idea of fantasy not also important in promoting actual musical selves? So for any musicians out there, not just music majors, but musicians, did fantasy ever play a role in developing, in your personal development as a musician? Just something to think about. You also pointed out, in terms of this is not virtuosity or musicianship, is that there's a difference between hitting buttons in correspondence with recording versus creating those sounds yourselves. That these are gamers, not musicians. There are actually versions of Guitar Hero where you can start creating the sounds and composing. So I'm just wondering if you would actually consider that a step towards becoming a virtuoso. So does a real musician have to come up with the technology to create music too? So in this discussion, I got the sense, going back to Paganini in the 19th century and Liszt and Chopin, they kind of already had the instruments there, but they changed those instruments, right? And that's why we label them as virtuosos. So if you're using someone else's tools, is virtuosity attainable, or do you have to do something and change those tools to be a virtuoso? Another thing to think about. Let's see, you said that interest in virtuoso musicians led to the creation of the game. It's not interest in becoming a virtuoso musician. I thought that was an interesting point. Those of you who actually supported Guitar Hero Rock Band as an expression of primarily virtuosity, not necessarily musicianship. The majority of you, almost all of you, said, well, these aren't musicians, but I could see them as virtuosos. You said that this was because there is visual spectacle present. If you watch the YouTube video of Freddie Wong playing YYZ, I mean, he gets into it. He has an ego, and I know personally as a teacher, I mean, yes, I used to be a performer. I played oboe, but now I still consider myself a performer. I'm a pretty happy person, but when I'm actually on a stage, and this is literal for MUS189, when I teach it face to face, I do have to take on a bit of a persona, kind of a comedian persona is what I take on, and I think that that's more effective in terms of creating a successful teaching environment. So visual spectacle is present. There's a creation of this personality, right? We know that Paganini did this. He embraced being this demon of the violin. There's this mythology that's built around the performer, and you can use this to sell yourself. I loved that we got to, and this was earlier on, I'm sorry, I forgot who said this, really underlining that, well, it depends on the audience to create the definition of a virtuoso. So if people are recognizing guitar heroes and rock band musicians as virtuoso performers, even if they're virtuoso performer gamers, then indeed they are virtuosos. If you think about the popularity of Liszt and Chopin and Paganini, it's the audience that made them so, right? So if the audience had never recognized them, perhaps we wouldn't be talking about them today, right? You also said even if gaming community, there's an ability to create music, which I already pointed out. Also, some of you pointed out, well, even though we're using recordings, right, but the instrument can indeed produce sound. So once again, getting us to question, what is music? So who's to say that Guitar Hero guitar is indeed not an instrument just because it is not perfectly imitating the actual acoustic instrument that it was modeled after? So that's really interesting point to rethink our definition of an instrument. Your last question was focused on, is Guitar Hero helpful for endorsing music, or does it denigrate music or musicianship in any way? I think a lot of you once again could see it either way, but leaned towards its ability to help in terms of all of these issues. So discovering new genres, you find a kinship with other musicians, or some just bonding, general familial bonding, or friendships that are made over playing certain pieces of music, or playing certain pieces of music, however you like to think about it. introducing you to music and instruments in general. Say if you have no background, this can just give you a general introduction, however simplified it may be. And then it certainly seems to be a good thing for artists, although some artists actually have pulled away from Guitar Hero and Rock Band and do not want to work with the technology because they feel that it does give people a false sense of reality in relation to music, which some of you pointed out as well. So maybe the game is underlining a traditional sense of virtuosity, right? Not through the gamers, but through the artist's recordings used in the game. So these are still people who are generally Hendrix, Zeppelin. They're considered virtuoso and virtuoso bands in a very traditional sense. But if we could begin to think of it as on the other way, as through the performers, we maybe begin to change our definition of who a musician is. I also like towards the end I read a response that said, well, or original response to the 3 questions that said, well, for those who can't afford a live experience, this brings it right into your home. It's the same thing as going to a movie theater. It can be pretty costly, although some of those theaters are pretty nice lately, right? Instead, you can watch Netflix, right? Or Hulu, and those have developed on their own. If you think about how much, let's take Netflix, has changed over the course of just 5 years or 6 years. Now I would just want to watch, personally, TV that's on Netflix, right? So it went from basically changing a movie theater environment to the home to then actually cultivating the tradition within the home. There were also points for saying that Guitar Hero Rock Band actually takes away from music. First of all, it's a simplification of music. It's purely for commodification if the artists want to be used. It's an imitation of a realistic performance environment that may trick players into believing that that experience is real, so there could be a danger if the virtual slash digital and a real slash acoustic divide is not recognized. And I love towards the end, the last person said, this could actually keep people from learning an instrument because it's just generally easier, or it's more, not even easier, but more relatable for those students, for anyone who's been kind of raised within a virtual environment. You play video games all the time. It's really easy to access video games. So why am I going to spend, thousands of dollars on an instrument when I can just go and pick up Guitar Hero and have a similar experience? It's that danger. Is it a similar experience is what you have to question. And then this equating the actual, I loved this. If you watch a YouTube video of Freddie Wong, someone playing Guitar Hero, there are just sometimes even more hits on those videos than the original videos or like live performances by the artists whose music is featured within Guitar Hero. So blurring that virtual and the virtual side and the real side can be really dangerous, even though it's selling artists music. It might be denigrating themselves as performers in the end. So you can see I'm going to post this summary of your of what you said under the Module 4 wrap up. Thank you so much for your discussion. I'm now going to go ahead and go through that for the DJing, The Art of DJing by Mayakawa. If you have any questions, let me know. I know our journey is coming to an end, but I just am so impressed. I'm impressed by all of you, even though I've never met you in person yet. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.